Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood Jerry Rasco here with you again, and today it is time for another Art of Spider-Man retrospective video. Today we are going to be looking at the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 28, and yeah, this one is fun. It has some very interesting things for us to look at, some things that are different from other issues that we've seen before, both in story and in the art. So I'm looking forward to covering that with you. So, yeah, we're about to get into it. Before we do, first, of course, thank you all for checking out these videos and for subscribing to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time here, please do consider clicking the subscribe button. These videos do come out every Monday morning at 8 a.m. And if you enjoy this content, you don't want to miss it. So make sure you subscribe, hit the notifications, and join us every day or every week with a new Spider-Man video. I also have other videos here on my YouTube channel that you may enjoy. Again, primarily focusing on comic book and comic book art. I talk about my own production style, the tips and tricks that I use in making my own comics. Talk about comic book literature, comic book history, all kinds of stuff. So definitely check it out, come by and enjoy. So, without further ado, let's get over to the comic, let's take a look at it, and let's go through this together. Okay, so here we have the cover for The Amazing Spider-Man number 28, and I mean, right off the bat, I have to say, this is a very unique cover. I've seen this kind of motif used many times later. There'll be other examples we'll see as we go through the series here of The Amazing Spider-Man issues, but really this is the first time that we've done this, and that is using black with red lines to indicate the webbing and sort of using the positive and negative space to fill out the form of Spider-Man. So if you're not familiar with that terminology, let me explain what that means here. So when you draw something, you are drawing it in a positive space, meaning we're drawing the arm. So the arm has form, shape, volume. It is a positive, and then the air around it would be the negative space. What we're doing here, you have the black background, and again, very bold choice for a comic to have a solid black background, but again, really useful, and it does fit into the story. So what we've done here is we've drawn the positive, which are the red lines. Now, we could have done this, it could have been drawn as a solid red block with the normal black webbing lines through it, but I think this really is very effective, that the light is so low that Spider-Man is basically almost invisible. So you draw these outlines, which outline the shape of where the gloves are and the back of the arm. Then you also draw the leg here of Molten Man, this new character that we're going to be getting into. And then you have more of this black, and it's the same exact black shade and black color as in the background, but the positive drawing around it, the arm and the leg, indicate the shape of the forearm to the elbow, the curve of the bicep, and then because this curves as well, our brains interpret what's missing and fill in the rest of the details, especially something here like the leg. Even though the leg isn't drawn, all that's really drawn is you draw the boot, you drew the belt, you drew the Molten Man's leg, and just sort of swiped out and erased the middle part. But our minds fill this in as we know the shape that his leg should be taking for it to come down and be here, and it fills in the rest for us. So it's a little bit of an optical illusion, but it is a great, great use of this technique. And in my opinion, this is an incredible, outstanding cover. Like I said, the use of positive and negative space, the black color, the red outline of the webbing on the costume, all in all, just classic and speaks volumes. Can't say enough good things about this cover. I think it is outstanding. So now we get into the comic. And, so again, if this is your first time checking out these videos with me, let me explain really quickly. This is a scanned PDF copy of this comic. So that is why you see on the cover here, there's a lot of kind of nicks and wear and tear around the edges. Inside, the paper is yellowed in places. Sometimes we'll see some bleeding of the ink because it's ink on old newsprint, stuff like that. And so this is exactly what it would have looked like when you purchased the comic off the shelf originally. But these were all scanned in 2004 and put onto, at the time, CD-ROM drive, so that people like me could have a collection without having to go back and buy these really, really expensive early issues of Spider-Man. It's cool too because you also get it with the original, what they call page turn. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go through, and all the old ads, which is kind of neat too. So here we go. So this is a splash page, again, showing kind of what's going to happen here in the issue. We've talked about this many times. Not my favorite use of a splash page because we have a cover. So we know Spider-Man is going to fight this new guy called the Molten Man. And here we have this guy under some sort of beam in golden color, and Peter all wrapped up in what looks like metal tendrils. We'll call them tendrils for lack of a better term. Cables, watching it happen. I'd rather jump into the story and use this space for the story. But again, it is what it is. Again, I'd probably rather see a version of Spider-Man and the Molten Man fighting versus Peter watching something. Just me. But in terms of the actual drawing, it's very good. The figures are done well. The lighting, all the dark shadows from this light, interesting how it's interacting with this guy. You can see the light on Peter, so it's creating this dark shadow around the contour of his face. And of course, all the wrapped cables, tendrils, conduit, whatever you want to call it, is also a really neat kind of drawing. I mean, it's an excellent use of 3D space to have them wrapping around him, wrapping around each other, that kind of stuff. So it's a very good drawing. Technically, it's very good. Again, for me, it just doesn't work as a splash page to sell the story. That's just me. So here we go. We get into the story a little bit, and we have a lot of talking heads. So if you followed along, if you're a viewer of the channel and a viewer of this series, you know that oftentimes this is just a necessity. Part of what makes Spider-Man so cool and so great as a story and a character in this comic book series is that we just don't deal with Spider-Man. We're not just looking at his adventures. We're also dealing with the life of Peter Parker and how does being Spider-Man interact with his regular day life. And so it's kind of interesting. And when you have that, it's not going to be action. He's not going to be punching bad guys or swinging through the city or things like that. Sometimes people just have to interact. And while these aren't the most interesting story beats, they are critical for moving the story forward. And Steve Ditko does an excellent job here of kind of setting it up. So you've got just enough of a background to tell you where he is, that he's at school. You've got this stairwell here. They're moving through. He's trying to talk to, this is Liz. Now, I'll mention this. This is Liz Allen. I believe she's been identified as Liz Allen before, but here she's called Liz Hilton. And I think that might be an error. If I could be wrong. I could be misremembering it. I know, obviously, in the future, she's definitely Liz Allen. I think she's been called Liz Allen in the past. I didn't go back to double check and make sure, but I believe that's correct. So there's an error there on it'd be on Stan Lee's part, as he did all the scripting. So he might have forgotten that he already called her Liz Allen one time. But Peter's trying to talk to her and she doesn't want to do it. So she just keeps walking. So the background changes, which gives us nice pace of movement and action through the story. So again, all stuff you've got to do. And basically what they're setting up is the fact that Peter is graduating from high school. And that's actually something we'll talk about it at the end and kind of as we wrap up. But it is a nice plot point to have a character who is aging. Right? It'd be very easy to write Spider-Man as a teenager forever. He never gets older, or it takes him, 30 years to get out of high school. He's just in high school forever. That could be done, right? There's certain characters that never really get older in comics, but obviously that wasn't the plan here. Peter was going to age, not necessarily 100% in real time, but we're a couple of years into the series here, and Peter is aging, and now he's graduating high school. So the other plot point that's going through the story here is that Peter is kind of without a Spider-Man costume at the moment. So he lost one by having to abandon it to this guy down here that he's talking to, which is a gentleman named Professor Dr. Smythe, who built a spider slayer, is what we know it later. Right now it's just a robot. And so Peter had to abandon his costume to escape. And then Aunt May threw out his spare costume that she found. And that left him with a store-bought costume that shrunk when it got wet. So he is seeing if maybe he can get in here and try to get his old costume back. And here we have a repeat. This is the robot that he fought as Spider-Man that reacts to him and his spider powers, which is nice. Again, nice little throwback to that issue. And again, we see the cables or conduits or tendrils, whatever you want to call them, really, are drawn very, very well. It's a nice element there. Peter pulls the switch, leaves the shrunken store-bought costume, gets his costume back, and is getting ready to leave when Smythe's assistant or partner or whoever, they get into a fight over this liquid metal alloy that they've been developing. Smythe, it hasn't been tested. He doesn't want to let it go. This other guy's a hothead. They start fighting. So here, this is really good lighting, right? So they're fighting in amongst this crazy, super sci-fi, futuristic technology that you see here in all the backgrounds. And they hit a button, and all of a sudden now there's a lot of sort of electricity, radiation, power, whatever these beams are, kind of all over. And it's lighting up the area. So it's very nice that there's this big bright light source behind them. And so we see the shadows around them. It's good dramatic lighting, and maybe a little foreshortening here that this guy, I believe his name is Mark Raxton. Sorry. He's colored gold. Foreshadowing, very possible. And then I like this page too. So things are happening. Peter's going to step in and help, and they've activated the Spider Slayer robot, and the tendrils grab him again. And I like that in comic books, primarily because it is a visual medium. When you want to advance the story visually, you move from left to right. That is how we, as Western readers, understand progression, movement, and the nature of forward is going from left to right, because that's how we read. So if Peter here is moving from left to right at first to go to this guy's aid, and as the tendrils grab him and pull him backwards, now all of a sudden all that momentum is hindered and pulled back. And it's a nice visual metaphor for what's happening in the story, right? So all this momentum is going forward, and now it's being pulled backwards. Very easily, he could have changed the angle on the story, but it works with us visually and psychologically that his personal momentum and the story momentum is being held up and hindered. These two characters keep fighting. The electricity breaks the jar, and now Raxton is covered in head to toe in this gold alloy. Again, I'm going to cover this as we wrap it up. This is the first appearance we see of the Molten Man. So that's what he ends up calling himself. We'll see that in the story here. He has this his whole body is gold, his hair included, in this sort of metal sheen. So there's a lot of different ways that you can draw shiny metal. And to be honest with you, we don't see an awful lot of it in these comics. And I don't know if it's just a personal approach by Steve compared to like a Jack Kirby and how he rendered and did shadowing on metallic objects. As you can see, there's a lot more sort of feathering lines. So that's what you would call these little hash marks of shading, on the knuckle. So the light is on the top, you have the shadow underneath, but instead of a solid black, it's feathered. And we're going to see that throughout sort of the story of how this guy is rendered. For me, I think I would, even like the car here, if this is supposed to be a shiny metal car, you might do a solid line of a shadow or a highlight, but instead we have kind of feathery hash marks or hatching. And again, it feels almost textural. So you take like small marks in the man's hair here, in the Smythe's hair, and it gives us a texture of hair. Well, it's very similar in the mark making that we see in the metal shading. So to me, it comes across as a little, as the term I put is feathery or hairy, as opposed to slick and shiny. Just my take on it. Doesn't affect the story, but from an artistic standpoint, I think it's important to note that as you are drawing different materials, they should be rendered differently. Like cloth, it would be okay depending on the weave of the cloth to have more of your feathery rendering, hatching, stuff like that, because you may see the actual weave of the cloth depending on how close you are and what kind it is. Something like that's supposed to be extremely smooth metal, you're going to want to use fewer lines and probably some very sharp dark lines and then very light highlight areas. If you're doing wood, you're going to texture wood differently than you would concrete. It's important to note because, again, it just helps the reader to be able to identify what it is at a glance. Another nice dramatic lighting effect here as, the doctor is kind of coming to after being knocked out, and he's bemoaning the fact that they've lost all of this metal alloy they were working on, and what is he going to do? And as you can see here, the molten metal covering his body, or I guess absorbed into his body even, is giving him super strength and a measure of invulnerability to where he can crush metal, flip cars, and it doesn't hurt him at all. It's a nice close-up of a guy who's getting a little crazy. The power is going to his head, and that's kind of interesting there. Another note, right? So when you look at modern comics today, usually you have what is referred to as an anchor panel. And a panel in the page is the one that kind of tells the whole story at a glance. It's going to be the most important panel, the most emotional, the most dramatic, the most action-packed, whatever it is. And there's a couple of things on this page that really could have been anchor panels, but just sort of get blended into other panels. So, for example, flipping the car here, in a modern comic, this would be, you'd put this as half the page, quarter of the page, maybe even show part of the car breaking the panel wall as he's flipping it, really showing him in all his glory and power, or vice versa. You might keep that small, and this panel would be bigger than all the others to really get a close up and see the insanity and expression in his face. But that's not done here. And that part of it is just the style of the times and evolution of comic book storytelling. We're still in an early stage where things are still really being developed. We're not quite certainly not at a more experimental phase where we start to change the composition, make the composition part of the art. Right now, it's just a function of storytelling. Make it very clear, individual panels, but you could have what we call anchor panels on important moments and kind of miss that. This is another nice close-up of the craziness where this power is going to his head. Again, the shading is very nice in terms of you're going to have a lot more darks, shadows, and lights on a metallic surface than you would just a regular cloth surface or skin. But again, it comes across to me as sort of feathery or hairy, or in some ways maybe like almost wrinkly versus shiny. I do like the little spot shine on areas like the head and on the finger. And we've talked about this. There's a couple other issues way back that did this as well with, it was a robot. I think it was called the Living Brain. And the way that I think this is done, which is kind of a neat technique, is this would all be inked in solid black around the finger, around the head. And then you actually take a razor blade and sort of carve out or shave off the top layer of the paper to leave the white underneath. And that's usually how artists would do that effect. Now, Steve Ditko is his own inker, so that means he would have done this. So he would have filled this in with solid black and then carved out the white. It's possible he might have used white paint to do something like that, but the fact that it's so thin makes me think it's and the way that it the line sort of skips a little. Here, we can even zoom in to look at it in more detail. So the way that it the line skips in places, like right there and there, that to me makes me think that it's the razor blade technique, which is cool. And again, very, very nice. We see that kind of throughout a lot of the images of the Molten Man. There's some on the back of his head over here, and we'll see that throughout the comic. So it's a nice touch. This is a great upside down Spidey image. We've talked about this many times throughout the series of what's called a Dutch angle. So if you're new, what happens is any of these other sort of images are perpendicular to the ground. So meaning parallel is when two things are side by side and never touch. Perpendicular is when they are at a perfectly right angle. So again, think about like a tree in the ground or a building in the ground. These are perpendicular. So most of the time a human figure is going to be feet on the ground, head up, perpendicular. When you want to show some drama and extra energy to an image, you can take the entire world, basically that ground level, what it would be, and turn it on an angle, and that is referred to as a Dutch angle, and it comes from filmmaking techniques. And here Spidey is hanging down in front of the window, but the whole building is at a Dutch angle, which is pretty cool. But very, very nice figure here, the way he's bent around and hanging at the window. He leaps in. Here's something, we've talked about it before, but again, this is a very good example of something that Steve Ditko does exceptionally well. And that is he has action continuity. This is what I call it, where the fight sequences make sense from moment to moment. And what I mean by that is where this punch comes and Spidey ducks it, then he swings over with two hands and Spidey sort of swings away to the side. Then he tries a backhand, he ducks it, and then grabs him with his left arm that's forward. All of this, then from there, the Molten Man lunges, Spidey leaps over the top, and the guy holds his ground, and the clothes give way, and he goes into the ceiling, or into the wall. You can follow along, and if you were to draw every image like a film strip between this one to this one to this one to this one, it would be very clear. You could fill in those holes, and it could be a motion picture. So it has that sense of motion that really helps, because like here, this is a perfect example. So Spidey is flipped out of the way, he's ducked a back fist, his left arm is forward, and then that's the arm as he stands up that grabs this guy's arm. If he had switched and grabbed him with the right arm, it might have seemed a little strange because this left arm in this panel was forward. It's already there. This is very natural. This would be how it would happen in real life, theoretically. So it makes us as readers feel like this is happening. We can buy into it, the motions. We're not missing images or moments between panels. So that's very, very important, especially when you have like a fight scene, an action scene. You want to make sure that all the details are there. You don't want to skip whole sections. That's very important. So they keep fighting. I did notice a couple of things were a little funky here. Spidey gets punched, and I get it. He's kind of tilting the head backwards, which is good. At least he's reacting to the punch, which is excellent. But then this one is really nice, except the head is at a very strange angle. Like, we could have just had the back of the head here where he ducked down, to try to turn the head in that way really makes it look very odd. You can barely see the eye, and the dark shadow that's supposed to help define under the chin sort of blends in with the shadow on the Molten Man over here. And so the whole thing just comes out as a strange shape, where it would have been very easy to just do the top of the back of Spidey's head, which is just kind of round and a couple of the little web pattern. So that one was a little strange, I thought. But again, overall, the continuity and the choreography is good. We indicate here that his metal skin is slick molten skin. But to me, again, you have these lines where it almost looks, it reads as texture or something. So it doesn't look slick, it looks rough. As opposed to a shadow. Let's see here. Oh, I did mention this stairs. It's been a while since we talked about stairs. Drawing stairs in perspective is extremely difficult. And this is a really nice example of it as we look down and see them bouncing down the stairs. There's a ton of different options you could do. You could put the camera at the bottom of the stairs and have them coming at you. This is kind of nice. It's almost as if we were standing as a viewer outside the door. The two figures came smashing through a door and then went down the stairs, and we watched it happen, as opposed to us changing positions from being at the top of the stairs. Now we're at the bottom of the stairs. So that's good storytelling there. I think that works pretty well. But yeah, drawing stairs, if you don't do it correctly with the perspective right, it flattens them out, and it reads like a ramp made out of boards versus stairs. And it's this subtle little difference of you have to drop the stair tread down and have it at a 90 degree angle here. And that's what sets apart one step is below the other versus just a line of them. And like I said, like a ramp, think of like a boarding ramp on a boat or something to that effect. So this is very, very good here. The great stairs. They keep fighting, and Spidey's fighting as hard as he can, but he can't. The Molten Man isn't really hurt, and the Molten Man's not really getting the best of Spidey either. So they're just fighting. They're at this sort of not standstill, but a net zero, right? Nobody can get the upper hand, so they just keep fighting. And then this is terrific. So as they're fighting, they're in the basement. Spidey sees the single light bulb and gets an idea. He can use his spider sense in the dark. The Molten Man can't see in the dark. This is an excellent image. Great use of what we call an upshot. So there's upshots, downshots, long shots, close-ups, mid shots. Those are some of the terms you use, and these again are all things that you would use in camera or video or film to explain how close or far away the camera is, or what position it is in relationship to what you're recording or looking at. So this is an upshot, meaning we are looking up at the ceiling and Spidey, and this is an excellent use of this dark, what I would call a drop shadow underneath the chin to help sell this. So we see that there's a very strong light source at the top, so underneath is going to be pitch black. And then it also helps frame his jawline and the shape of his head, when you might lose that in the webbing design. It's one of the downsides to the Spider-Man costume. Overall, it's definitely one of the top. It's got to be a top 10 superhero costume, if not top 5 superhero costumes of all time, right? It's easily recognizable. It's often repeated but never duplicated. No, it's often duplicated but never improved, maybe, would be the way to do it. The classic design is fantastic, but as these webbing pattern wrap around the circular round form of the head, sometimes you lose the definition of where, like you notice, like Spidey never really, on the red parts of his costume, you don't see his muscles. You don't see abs. You don't see the cut of his pectorals. You don't see like where his collarbones are, because those lines would interfere with the webbing pattern. But when you can do a big shadow like this, it works great. The hand gesture is interesting and unique and really, really good. And again, gives us that plan. And then we also have the Molten Man's fist in the foreground. Now, here's a situation where, for me, I think the hatching lines work in a close-up like this. So in a close-up, I can see what he's trying to do, and it kind of works as metal because the hatching lines are, for the most part, enclosed or circled with other contour lines that are sort of either, shadows, tendons, stuff like that. So for me, that worked, especially when you see here. Let me zoom in on this. I think this is what I would have liked to have seen on the rest of the figure. You can see it a little bit here. You have a shadow, and then there's a gap between the contour of the outside of the form and this shadow. It really plays well here on the fist. So you have these shadows, but there's a highlight on top of the knuckle, basically. And then underneath you would have the shading. So that one works for me. There are other places where, as I mentioned earlier, it did not work as well, I thought. So now we get to what we've seen in the cover, where Spidey's in the pitch black and he's using his spider sense to basically tie up the Molten Man. I would have liked in some of these panels, especially the ones with just close-ups of the hands, if they had done it the way they did it on the cover, where we just had red lines indicating the webbing pattern on the hands. I think that would have been really cool. But this works as well, right? And now the Molten Man is captured. The webbing ropes get all hardened up, and he can't break them, and the cops show up, and so there you go. There's the Molten Man bagged and tagged for the police, and that's kind of it. And now Peter has to go graduate. And so now we're going to wrap up that story. So we've got Peter graduating, and the speaker at his graduation of all people is J. Jonah Jameson. And I mentioned this, anytime we see J. Jonah Jameson with this big smile like that, it's incredibly creepy. He's a character that needs to be scowling. It looks weird. It's very uncomfortable. I don't like it. I find it and I just go, yeah, it looks weird. Storyline, we've now seen the end, it looks like, of the Liz Allen, Peter, Betty Brant kind of triangle. Liz is like, I had a crush on you, but I need to grow up. And that's kind of the end of Liz Allen. We have Flash Thompson. It turns out Flash Thompson is also going to the same college as Peter. And he's like, so I got to deal with this guy for a little while. And then J. Jonah is trying to sweet talk Peter, and more importantly Aunt May, because if remember in the previous issues, Peter sold some of his Spider-Man photos to a different newspaper. So Jonah's trying to get in good with Aunt May to try to win Peter back. Here's another thing I noted in here. It's a dialogue issue, and again, I think it might have just been a misprint on Stan's part. So here we start where Aunt May and Mrs. Watson, her neighbor, aka the aunt to Mary Jane Watson, so Mrs. Watson lives next door, friends with Aunt May. Okay. Now, Mrs. Watson says, I can't wait to dash home and tell my daughter Mary Jane about it. So it makes you go, wait a minute. One, if you live next door and your daughter Mary Jane isn't here graduating from high school, what is she doing? Is she older? Is she younger? What? Wait, but we thought she was her niece. And so that's why Mary Jane didn't actually live next door. She would come and visit, but she didn't really live next door. And so I think that's a misprint. Again, something maybe just slipped by Stan, and it should have said niece, and it doesn't. And then here we go. Again, more smiling Jonah, very creepy. And everybody reaches the end, and this is the milestone of the story, and that's kind of it. Peter's graduated, and now he's on to new things. And there's the end of the issue. So let's head back to the main screen, and we'll wrap things up. Okay, so we're back here, and that is issue number 28 of The Amazing Spider-Man. As I said, it's interesting. We have a brand new character, so we have another addition to the Spidey's Rogues Gallery, which is cool. And the Molten Man has a lot of potential. We will definitely see him more down the line, and there's some really interesting things that come with the Molten Man later. But to start with, kind of an okay first appearance. We've got that origin, and then a fight, which is a lot of punching. Not much happens out of it, but a lot of punching. And so there is action there. For me, like I said, I didn't like the shading on the Molten Man, and again, this is all hindsight is 2020, right? At the time, fantastic. But you can look at things like Jack Kirby, and you can see the way that he would have drawn, say, like Iron Man or Captain America, the Captain America shield, the shine and the shading on Captain America's shield, the reflective nature. And then, of course, later, much later, we have artists like Bob Layton on Iron Man, who really captured that shiny technique, I think, in a way that really revolutionized how everybody has drawn it since. So Molten Man's great. It's not a problem. Just not my cup of tea in terms of the shading on the Molten Man, but doesn't really affect things in terms of the story. I said it was very nice to see the aging of a character. I mean, Clark Kent, I think, has been 30 forever. Batman is in his 30s forever. There's always a Robin who's young. Same with on the Marvel side. Iron Man, Tony Stark has always kind of been, 35 to 40, I think, year old guy kind of forever. So it was interesting to see a character go, hey, I've been around for, a little over 2 years, and now let's have him graduate high school. It wouldn't have changed the projection of what Spidey would do and how he fights villains and saves the day if he had been in high school for another 5 to 10 years, of real time. Stories still would have been there. But I like the idea that he was aging along with the readers. And that, I think, was important. And one of the reasons that makes Spider-Man so beloved. I first found Spider-Man as a child. And then as I went back and you're reading about Spider-Man is aging, and the things he has to deal with change over time, just like they do with us as people. So I think that's a cool idea. So in terms of a rating of this one, I would give this issue a 6 out of 10 for me personally. I thought the finale, the way it kind of wrapped up, was a little anticlimactic. I talked a lot about the rendering of the metal and the Molten Man. And then skip over to the graduation, which is all right, but there's a lot of that interaction with Jonah and a lot of that sort of stuff. We could have skipped through a little bit of that maybe. So overall, 6 out of 10. I think the cover is the best part of the issue overall. And but we'll come back next week and we will look at Amazing Spider-Man 29. We're heading forward at a rapid pace. Pretty soon we're going to be looking at the second annual issue, which will be a much bigger, oversized issue with new story. That'll be really interesting. So we'll be looking at that in a couple of weeks. And we're quickly Spidey is heading into the 30s in terms of the number of issues. And to be honest with you, it is a milestone. Not all comics make it that far. When you do a comic a month, so you have 12 issues a year, and you start getting into your 30s and issue number 30, issue number 40s, issue number 50s, means you've been going for a few years and the readership is there and you're probably here to stay. So great stuff. As always, thank you for your time. Thank you for dropping in and checking this out. While you're here, think about checking out some of my other videos here on the channel. We've got more stuff coming up. And don't forget to follow me on all the social medias. It's just Jerry Rasco. That's Rascoe, Rasco. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, X. And we just started doing work on Whatnot. So if you're interested in buying original art, you're going to start seeing some shows there as well. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next week with more Amazing Spider-Man. Thanks.